Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another segment of Ameriguayas. This is Delicia speaking with my gal pal.
Mary. We are happy to continue this conversation today. And we are actually going to introduce what Hispanic Heritage Month means. What are some of the problematic areas in the name itself? Some of the roots of where that started and what we plan on doing with Ameriguayas throughout the month from September 15th to October 15th.
Yes, there's a lot of history behind Hispanic Heritage Month, and we'll talk, like Mary said, about what it means to us and how maybe it could look different with more inclusion.
Yes. So the first thing I guess we would want to introduce is the word Hispanic, right? And where that kind of comes from and where Hispanic Heritage Month started and what that looked like to us growing up in school or in college, and then outside of the educational space. So Hispanic comes from the word created to kind of lump the people who speak Spanish from Spain in Central America, South America, Mexico, the Caribbean. So it sort of lumps us all into one sort of monolithic group, which we all know that we are not. So that is one of like the main issues that the word Hispanic kind of introduces when people celebrate that month. So it's kind of like, well, what are we really celebrating? How are people celebrating it? Are all countries being included? And as Paraguayan Americans, we feel Paraguay is often not represented in this month. So we're going to highlight a lot of things about Paraguay during this month, and then again, dissect what Hispanic means and what we can do to kind of highlight each individual country.
Yeah. And it's a distinction between Latino, right? So Hispanic generally, like Mary said, includes descendants of the Spanish language. So that doesn't include maybe Brazil, speaks Portuguese versus Spanish. However, they are included in the Latino or Latino America conversation and kind of box. So that's one way that Hispanic Heritage Month is not inclusive, because Brazil is still part of that immigration experience and still part of having people who come to the US and live here. So are they not celebrated this month? Technically they should be, because we are all encompassing Latin America, Central America, and Mexico, which is part of North America. So that's one of the big issues that I think we've talked a lot about, is it's actually not that inclusive. And then aside from Brazil, like our experiences growing up with it in schools and in college, and they use like decorative things to showcase the different countries. It's like Paraguay's flag is rarely there, and a lot of people don't know where Paraguay is located or that it's even a country. And so part of our goals with Ameriguayas is to highlight Paraguay and our Paraguayan American identity through growing up here. So that's one of the things I noticed, like in college, was the lack of representation of like a physical flag, right? If you Google who are all the Spanish speaking countries, Paraguay is going to come up on that list, but generally they only include maybe Mexico, Puerto Rico, the República Dominicana, sometimes Honduras or El Salvador, and Cuba, maybe. Depends on politically where the person who creates that programming is, right? Because Cuba is programmed as like an enemy of the US and communist. So there's it falls into who has the power of that program to showcase Hispanic Heritage Month, right? So all these talks that Mary and I like to talk about?
Yeah, just like Delisa, you mentioned the term Latino, Latina, and like the most recent that you've been hearing a lot is Latinx, which is more inclusive, non-binary. So that in itself is also problematic to the indigenous or African descendant people who live in these countries. So you take that term, and what's the root of that word? It's still Eurocentric. It's still Eurocentric terminology. So all those things we're kind of trying to unravel and just kind of take like a look back and reflect on our experiences. And so like for me, like Alicia said, yes, used to see the flags and you kind of think about, well, what was really the purpose, you know, of that month? I can't remember like one thing that really stood out. Like, is it to highlight the Spanish language? Like, so those are just like kind of things like I don't necessarily consider myself Hispanic or Latina. Like I'll use that in a term phrase. I kind of like on a census, for example, right? So, but for me, like we've mentioned before, we identify as Paraguayan Americans. So we use our country origin to identify ourselves. But if I were to use, I guess, a more general term, it would be Latina.
Right. Yeah, and it's bringing up a great point of like the why this term was created, right, is to put us all in this monolith. And we know growing up as Paraguayan and having other friends from other countries that we're very proud of our cultural heritage and where we come from, like Colombia, Ecuador, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, wherever the country is. And that's part of like the erasure of our identity too. So us taking a stance to say Paraguayan American, or if someone says, are you Paraguayan? It's like, yes, I am, right? Both of my parents are Paraguayan. I'm 100% Paraguaya, and I'm also 100% US born because that's where I was born. So having those identity politics conversation is so important to reclaiming who we are and not what the larger societal narrative tells you who you are. So I think that's part of reclaiming Hispanic Heritage Month in this way. And we're going to be showcasing fun facts and things about Paraguay in particular, because we want to amplify the voices of Paraguayan Americans, which many times we are either not even part of the conversation and not correctly represented, as we talked about in our media conversation.
Right. Yeah. So there's no, right or wrong. Like if you identify yourself as a Hispanic or a Latina, that's fine. Like that's what we're trying to have that's why we're trying to have this conversation, is to kind of just talk about it and see, what do I identify myself with? And so there's kind of like different ways you can. So it just is a matter of, your own self-identifiers and yeah, that's really it. There's no wrong or right, but it's important to know the history and the background of the words, and then maybe you can make a better decision on, where your identifier comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a lifelong journey of understanding, like, not only where we come from and where we live geographically and how do we want to identify. And the fun part is we get to choose.
Yes, that is.
We get to decide.
The most important part is that you get to choose. And so, yes, while the census may tell us Hispanic or Latino, Latina, it doesn't mean that that's right either, because that's partially why it was created as well, to lump us all in one group.
Correct. Yes. So if you're watching this, make sure you're commenting how you identify, what words connect with you, what words don't. If you feel comfortable sharing with us in the comments, or shoot us a DM. And if you want to stay anonymous, We really want to hear from all of you, what you're feeling, how you're celebrating, if you are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, or maybe Country of Origin Appreciation Month, maybe is a better word, more inclusive. We don't know. We're trying to talk it out, right? That's why we're having these digital space conversations. So
Yes.
let us know what you think.
Yes. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Until next time. Adios.